There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 167, and today in the show, it is story time, as I'm sharing all the details of my absolutely mind-blowing, unbelievable Alaskan caribou hunting experience, and an update on my still-in-progress Montana public land whitetail hunt. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today, it's just Dan and I have got some stories to tell. But Dan, before all that, what's new with you?
Mark, let's just cut the bullshit right now, okay? Nobody cares about what's going on with me, especially when you're posting pictures behind a giant caribou and your social media feed is saying, "Oh, cool, man! Look, I'm in Montana in a hunting whitetail." When the coolest thing I've done in the past 2 weeks is I checked one trail camera. My family got a new house. My wife gets mad because my son has a running nose and he wipes his boogers on it. My wife's pregnant and she's about to pop. That's my life right there. 30 seconds, really.
Well,
right?
So you got a new house? That's news.
No, a new couch.
Oh, couch.
Yeah, couch.
Okay,
yeah.
I remember the couch story, the brownie points of the couch story.
Yep, that was the birthday present. So, and my son, he's in this mode. This is disgusting, and I'm sure all boys at some point did it, but he is in full-blown pick your nose and eat it mode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm slapping his hand away. I'm saying, no, that's disgusting. And he looks at me like I'm not even there, just with these hollow eyes, and he picks his nose and he puts it in his mouth. And I'm just like, buddy, that is disgusting. That is disgusting.
Oh, Mac, he's going to be a troublemaker.
Oh, buddy, he already is. He just doesn't give it. He doesn't care. He doesn't care, which is kind of cool. I see him as growing up being the kid that never gets peer pressured into doing anything because he doesn't care what other people are doing. He's that kid who just, hey man, I don't care if you think picking boogers and eating them is gross. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to be happy doing it.
He's going to be 18. I'm like, I don't care, man. I don't care. Well, good for him.
Yeah, good for him.
Oh,
good for him.
Man.
So I'm thinking today we flip the script a little bit. And this is the Wired to Hunt podcast, but I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about your trips, the caribou hunt with Rinella, the Montana, the Montana adventures that you got going on, and just kind of shoot from the hip like we always do.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan because there's lots to share over what I've been doing over the past few weeks and what's going on this week too. So yeah, so I could either just do you want to hear about my Alaska trip? Should we start there?
Mark. Nope. Nobody wants to hear about that. Shut up. Here, this is. But before we get into the Alaska trip, right?
Yeah.
What were you doing before that? I mean, because you went antelope hunting, right? We talked about that a little bit, and you never tagged out, right?
No, I didn't tag out because I only had one day to hunt. Because I was there with my wife and just had a lot of stuff going on. I was trying to get as much work done as I could before heading off for these trips, and then I also was going on a pack rafting trip that I was doing for this other project I'm working on. So did I tell you about how that went?
No, you did not, and I think that's going to be a great place to start.
Yeah, so that was, man, it has been a pretty epic couple weeks because that was one of the very coolest trips I've ever done. So me and my buddy Andy Bradley, we went and did a pack rafting / fishing / backpacking trip in the Bob Marshall Wilderness up in northern Montana. And the Bob is one of the largest, wilderness with a capital W areas in the lower 48 states. And for those that don't know, when I say wilderness, I'm not saying just like generically, oh, it's wild. I'm saying like it's a designated by the federal government wilderness area. So that means there's no motorized traffic, no permanent structures. It's the highest protection that's given to public lands. So what that means basically is it's super, super rugged, super wild, and one of the highest densities of grizzly bears in the lower 48. So just an awesome place. So me and Andy, we rented these rafts and we threw them. And Kylie dropped us off at like this reservoir, and we paddled our way up this reservoir for like 4 miles. And man, right as we started going, it started like pouring rain and like 20 or 30 mile an hour wind. And I'm like, oh God, what did we get ourselves into? Like we could hardly make any progress because the wind was blowing right in our face. But we made it a few miles down, and then like the water levels were so low in the reservoir that actually we just ran out of water. We couldn't find a channel that kept going up into the river, so we had to take the boats out, pack them all back up, and then strap them to our backpacks. And then we hiked another 4 miles or so until we got to a campsite. Had a black bear run across right in front of us, which was kind of cool. And then the next day we hiked another 6 to 8 miles, something like that. And then the final 2 days, we rafted this river all the way back to where we started. So it was a 4-day trip, half packing, half rafting, and then we fished every day. And, man, unbelievable scenery, just like beautiful rolling hills and mountains, and then this river was just this gorgeous kind of snake of emerald winding its way through this valley. And then every once in a while you get to these big rocky cliffs and stuff, and we saw lots of deer, eagles. We didn't see any grizz, but we did have a good number of tracks around us that we saw. There was a big track and sow and cub track near our camp one day, and then our last day hiking out, we walked right in fresh from that morning tracks that were heading towards us. So at some point he was on the trail, and he probably heard us coming, headed off the trail, and then we just passed through.
Wow.
So that was cool.
Crazy.
But man, the fishing was it was the very best fly fishing I've had in my entire life, by leaps and bounds.
Right.
Between the two of us, the first night, I caught 9 and Andy caught 15. The next day we both caught I caught 27, he caught 30. The next day it was 33 and 33. The next day we didn't fish very much, but still caught some. But I mean, it was insane. And that was just the fish that we landed, that we got to our hand. There were so many fish that we missed, or that broke off, or that we lost at some point. I mean, it was just the most fun fly fishing ever. It was nuts.
So I want to ask you a question real quick. This trip, you rafted, and then you had to deflate the rafts, right? And hike with them on your back?
Yeah, yep. So we had the rafts on our back, we had paddles, we had the inflating device, we had a life jacket, and we had all of our regular backpacking stuff too. So we had tents and sleeping bags and sleeping pads and food for 4 days, and all of our fishing gear, so fly rods, reels, flies, all that stuff. So we had some big packs on.
Yeah. So the next question, well, it's not really a question. Yes, it is a question. Will you promise to take me on that same trip someday?
Yeah, dude. If you can make it out there, we should definitely do that.
Yeah.
It was
okay, cool.
It was. I mean, I've done a lot. I've done a ton of backpacking trips, but this was a really cool change of pace because you did some backpacking and hiking, so you feel like you worked for it. But then half the trip you were just floating along and like enjoying yourself. And the river was like it was at a nice point as far as water levels, where it was relatively low water. So the rapids that you hit, they weren't too bad, so you didn't feel like you're gonna die. But there was enough that like you had an adrenaline rush, and you better like paddle well and get around these rocks, otherwise you're gonna get flipped. So there was enough excitement. But then there were these long stretches where you just floated with your feet in the water and just enjoyed it. So it was like relaxing, adrenaline, catch a bunch of fish.
Wow.
So yeah, and just gorgeous weather. I mean, it was like 80s in the day, but like a dry 80s, so comfortable, really nice and cool at night. And man, it was just amazing trip. And that's part of this public land related writing project I'm working on. I'm gonna share that story and that. So excited about that. Super cool trip. And then I came back and I had like 3 days to get all my shit around, pack up, unpack from that trip, and then start packing for the new trip. Yeah. And then Kylie and her friend Megan took off, and they road tripped through Yellowstone and Grand Teton on their way back to Michigan. And then I drove my camper into Bozeman and parked in the long-term parking lot, slept in the long-term parking lot in the airport on Friday night, and then I left for Alaska.
Nice. So how long was that float trip in total?
4 days total.
Okay, 4 days. All right, cool. So that's something that you would recommend to somebody in the future?
Highly, highly recommend a pack rafting trip like that. And, I think you got to be aware of like your skill set, and if you've never rafted or paddled a kayak or anything and don't have those experiences, I would like either go with someone who does or try to learn before doing this. And then make sure you check on water flow levels for a river like this, because this river that we did, if we did it at much higher flows, it could be dangerous, especially if you didn't really know what you're doing. And I'm not an expert by any means of this. I paddled a decent bit, but I was even a little nervous, not knowing exactly how rough these things are going to be. But for a lot of rivers, maybe all rivers, I'm not exactly sure on that, but the USGS keeps water flow meters in most of these rivers, so you can actually go on Google and look up, and just Google, X river water flow, and it'll show you what the flow rate is. And that gives you a good like starting point. And then, man, there's so much information online these days that people kind of give you like guides for different rivers and stuff. So I found a website that had all sorts of information about different rivers that you can raft in the Bob Marshall or in that general area. And then he had information that's saying, okay, at this flow rate, it's like class 5 rapids, like super dicey. At this flow rate, it could be like class 2 to 3 and be pretty decent. At this flow rate, it's too low. So just look up that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of rivers like this that you can do in the Bob, in that general area. There's the it's called the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, and that includes the Bob Marshall Wilderness, the Scapegoat Wilderness, and the I think it's the Great Bear Wilderness or something like that. I'm probably wrong. But there's 3 wilderness areas all tucked in just south of Glacier National Park, and that forms this Northern Rockies ecosystem. And it's just an unbelievable section of Montana. So highly recommend. What's cool about it is, Glacier is epic mountains, but once you go south of that into these wilderness areas, you don't have nearly the crowds. So you can see some similar things to Glacier, but not deal with, thousands of people. So
right. Yeah. Man, that sounds like fun.
All right, so real quick before we go any further, I want to pause real quick to thank our partners at Sitka Gear. And rather than share a typical Sitka story from someone else, I thought I'd share a bit about my own experiences on this Alaska trip we're talking about, because really, this whole podcast is a Sitka story. And for this hunt, I needed a bunch of new gear that was going to be appropriate for the location and the type of things that we were going to be doing. So here's a system that I ended up using and that worked very, very well for me. On the bottom for this hunt, I was wearing the Sitka Timberline pants. These are just like a super rugged soft shell type pant. It's like their proto typical sheep hunter's pant, but it worked great for this too. And it's got this heavy-duty reinforced backside and heavy-duty knee pads actually in the front that I ended up really, really liking. So this pant is really built for the kind of hunt I was on, where you're crawling or kneeling or sitting down and glassing a lot. So loved those pants. And even when it was down in the 30s or ripping windy, which it was a lot, this is all I ever needed to wear on my lower half, nothing else. Now on the top, I wore a core lightweight base layer, a core midweight quarter zip layer, and then my Fanatic hoodie. And then when it got really cold or windy, I topped it all off with the Kelvin Light hoodie, and that's like a ultralight, packable, puffy type jacket. And everything there in that list, it performed great, and it gave me the flexibility that I needed to shed or add layers based on the conditions or activity. So I was able to be comfortable out there no matter if it was super hot or super cold. And then finally I had the Stormfront jacket and pants for my rain gear. And we did get some pretty serious rain on 2 of the days I was out there, and this gear worked flawlessly. I got another number of compliments on it actually. And the pants and jacket I found were just really smartly designed with pockets and adjustment points exactly where you'd want them. I couldn't have been happier with it, and at no point did I get wet or water seeping in anywhere. So that's what you want to hear. So there you have it. That's my Alaskan Caribou Hunt Sitka system. And stick around here for more of my Sitka story. As you might expect, this hunting experience is really once in a lifetime, and I'm just really glad that my clothing enabled me to be out there and to be effective and to be comfortable. So if you'd like to make a Sitka story of your own someday, you can learn more at sitkagear.com.
Now, transitioning to your Alaska trip, did you, before we even talk about the travel to get there, I know that you were pumped and jacked to start, that you even got the opportunity to do this. So before you left, did you have any expectations of what this trip, this big Alaska trip, was going to be like?
A little bit. I knew when I got the invite, I talked to the guys about it, and they, shared some information, and they said that they had heard really good things about the area we were going into. And we were flying with a transporter. So basically there's lots of different kind of bush plane type operations up in Alaska where they transport hunters and all sorts of people way back there into the wilderness. And the transporter we were going with was very reputable. They're well known to they'll get you in the right places and everything like that. So it sounded like the plan was to go into an area that should be really good, and there's a migration of caribou that comes through here this time of year. That's 50,000 caribou strong is this population. It's the 40-mile herd, and it's somewhere around 50,000 caribou. They all they bunch up more and more and more as they get into September and October. So I knew based on all those things there was a good chance of seeing a lot of animals. And then I also knew that it was going to be like beautiful country. They had done a hunt up in this general area last year for moose, somewhere within like 20, 30 miles maybe of where we're at, give or take. So they, I heard a little bit about the general terrain and stuff, but that's basically all I knew. And so it was going to be myself hunting, Rinella was hunting, and then Steve's friend Doug Duran, who's a guy from Wisconsin, a whitetail hunter from Wisconsin, who's done a lot of stuff with Steve, and Steve's hunted on Doug's property a lot in Wisconsin, so this is kind of like a way of saying thank you to Doug, I think, inviting him on this trip.
Yeah, for sure.
So it was going to be the three of us hunting, and then there was 4 other people that were on the production side of things, so the crew. So there was 2 full-time cameramen, and then the producer, and then a wilderness production assistant is what they call this other guy, Brody. And both of them, Giannis and Brody, both had some cameras too for different things. But yeah, so I knew I was going in there with 7 guys. That was going to be really different, and I knew it was going to be beautiful, and I knew we would probably see a lot of caribou. And that was basically all I knew, and those were my expectations going in. Were just like, I'm going to Alaska, and it's going to be like an amazing experience. Whether I killed anything or not, like I wasn't really concerned about that at all. Like I could have gone and not shot anything, and I would have still been super stoked.
Right.
I've just wanted to see Alaska my whole life. Dreamed about it, and just like, oh gosh, for years and years and years, thought about trying to get up there. So that was where my head was at going in.
All right. So then you're sleeping in this parking lot, and it's the eve before you're getting ready to take off on this epic adventure, right? Something that you're going to tell your children about, right? Something that you will never forget. The first time you ever went to Alaska on this kick-ass caribou hunt with some people that everybody knows, and especially if you're a hunter.
Yeah.
Did you have like opening day sleep, like you couldn't sleep, like opening day, like the first day you're going to go whitetail hunting, or was this on a different level?
It was a little weird. I'm trying to remember exactly what my sleep situation was. It was like that day was like a crazy day because like I had to pack up Kylie left that morning, and so like it was like saying goodbye to her and getting all of her stuff ready to go, and I wasn't going to see Kylie for 3 weeks, so it was kind of sad saying goodbye to her. And then like it was like this really strong sense of like loneliness all day because for all this time I'd been with Kylie the whole time and our dogs and doing all this stuff, and I don't know, like you're together all the time for like almost 2 months. Like it's not like she goes to work and I go to work and then we see each other at night. It's like we're with each other the entire day in this little camper. So then when it went from like all that interaction to like complete silence and nothing around, and I was just in the camper by myself, I was like, whoa. It just felt weird. So then that whole day was like kind of weird. But I was like busily trying to get stuff around, and then I had to drive the camper, and I've been trying to find somewhere to keep the camper, like a campsite. I was hoping to find a national forest pull-off where I could park the camper, leave it, and not have to pay, and then come back and pick it up. But I couldn't find anywhere that I could get the camper up to that was reasonably close. So I ended up finding out that I could park the camper at the airport. And that night I think I was just so busy getting stuff around, I didn't even really have like jitters at all or like nerves about the trip. It was just like, gotta get this done, and by the time I had everything done, it was super late anyways, so I just crashed, and then I think I was up at like 5 a.m. to get in the airport and catch our flight.
Right. All right, so how long did the trip take from the time you took off in Bozeman to the time you actually got to Alaska?
So our flight left like 7 in the morning or something like that from Bozeman, and then we flew from Bozeman to Seattle, and then we had a long layover in Seattle, like 2 or 3 hours, and we met up with a couple of the guys. So there was a group of like 5 of us now that were there, and we just had like a big breakfast and talked about stuff. And then from Seattle, we flew to Fairbanks, Alaska, and I think we got into Fairbanks around like 3 o'clock their time. So I don't know. It was a pretty long day, and then we got to Fairbanks, got all of our gear, and man, when you travel with these guys, it is an unreal amount of gear that they take. Right. I think we had like 20. I don't know how many total bags we had, but I do know that when we left Bozeman, just for me, Giannis, and Dirt, there was 18 bags that we checked there, and these like huge duffels or big Pelican cases full of camera equipment or podcast equipment or all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So there was probably 25, 30 bags that we picked up at Luggage and Fairbanks. We rented a van and a car, and then we drove from Fairbanks to another town, which is where our transporter was, and we got in late that night and got dinner, and then I just passed out and was ready for the early flight in the morning.
Right. Okay, so I mean, flying into Alaska itself had to be pretty kick-ass, right? I mean, how far is that flight from Seattle to Alaska? So to Fairbanks?
Yeah, so from Seattle to Fairbanks, I think was like 3.5 hours or something like that.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I didn't have a window seat. I wish I did though, because like I had an aisle seat, so I had to like look past 2 people through the window, and I was like over the wing. But even with all that, you could still see some just unbelievable mountains.
Right.
Just, completely snow-covered, massive peaks, all these glaciers. You're flying, like the whole trip, but especially when you're on the plane, I just felt like I was living like a Discovery Channel special. It's just like, I just, like this isn't, I kept telling myself, this isn't a movie, Mark, this is life. Like, this is actually real life. But like I'm flying over glaciers, like massive tongues of ice coming off of these mountainsides. Just awesome. And so that was sweet. And then we touched down in Alaska, and I was like, holy crap, I'm actually in Alaska. Like, we landed there, and then I'm like, hey, guys, I just checked a major item off my life bucket list. So I'm just going to turn around and go home now. Made it to Alaska.
Yeah. So then then it's time to take off from the transporter plane, right?
Yeah.
That following morning and head into the bush, right?
Yeah, and that was really cool. So some of the guys were being shuttled from town to a wilderness airstrip on a bigger plane, like a 4-person plane, and then they would take a smaller plane from that airstrip to our camp. But the 2 heaviest people, I was one of the 2 heaviest people, we got to fly straight from town all the way to our camp area in the little Super Cub. And the Super Cub is this really small plane. It's like kind of ridiculous. Seeing it for the first time. There's just the pilot in front and then you. And it's like basically the pilot's like sitting in my lap. Like my legs are on either side of him, and it's just like glass all around me and one single propeller. And it looks like you could just like tip this thing over with your leg if you kicked it. But man, that was so cool. We got it, started flying, and very quickly you pass town, and then it's just nothing. So first is all this is like muskeg, like swampy, tundra-y, marshy stuff that we're flying over, and like the colors are like these reds and yellows of these different willows and grasses and stuff. We're flying over all this stuff, and then you start coming into these hills, and then eventually these big mountains. And it's, there's all sorts of spruce trees, and aspens are starting to change colors, and then these massive above tree line mountaintops, just barren rock in stone. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of the Presidential Range in New Hampshire, like the White Mountains up there, Mount Washington. For anyone familiar with that area, this looked very much like that, like those types of mountains, but like just imagine on a much, much bigger scale. But we're flying over these in this little Super Cub, and we're flying like 50 feet or 100 feet off the ground, like just buzzing around these ridge tops and curling around stuff, and you can just see everything. I mean, it was just a super, super cool flight, and that, again, was just like, there's no way I can describe it in words to like convey just like, on this flight and the entire time, I was just in awe of the scale of everything, like the distance I could see, and these massive mountains off in the distance, and these other mountains that I'm right on top of, and these beautiful rivers winding everywhere, and not a single sign of human intrusion or presence anywhere. I mean, it was just hundreds of miles of open space. And I'm thinking as we're flying over here, like, how many bears are out here, or moose, or caribou, or whatever it might be. I mean, there's so much wildlife all around here. So the flight in was super cool. What was interesting, though, is I assumed, like, they would be dropping us off, I don't know, on like a gravel bar or a runway that they've like made somewhere out in the wilderness or something. But that's not the case. They land you on top of a mountain, like a little ridge coming off of a mountainside. Like it's like there's like maybe 50 yards of space, and they just stop on a dime. Like they're flying down, and then just like boom, they're right there on the ground. But that's the case when the wind's good. I was the first plane to come in there, and we had like really windy conditions, and it wasn't good. So we go flying in, and he's like, all right, that's where we're going to land. I'm like, holy crap, that's where we're going to land? And he circles in and comes down, and then he comes in, and at the last second he pulls up and like cranks up and pulls up, and then he looks back and he goes, you don't get airsick, do you? And I'm like, I don't know yet. He's like, because this is going to be interesting. So he ended up having to do that like 4 or 5 times. Like he makes these really tight turns where we're completely on our side, spins around, and then comes flying in, and then tries to touch down on this 50-mile or 50-foot like circle on the ridge, and can't do it. Pulls up, does it over and over again. And meanwhile, while this is happening, he's scattering caribou off the mountain. Like there's caribou everywhere, right where we're gonna land. So finally, after like 5 times, he's able to get down. It was like, wow, that was something. And then, for the rest of another 4 or 5 hours or so, it was just basically them shuttling in the other guys and all of our equipment. And, then it was setting up camp. And meanwhile, while this is all happening, we're seeing caribou coming over the hillside or on the mountaintop or skirting around us on the ridge. I mean, there's just caribou everywhere. And we set up camp and got ready, and we were going to go do a little scouting once we all got settled. So any questions before I move on?
Yes. at this point, dude, like, you're telling me you're living something that I've been dreaming about personally as well. Has reality at this point set in for you at all, or are you just kind of overwhelmed with everything that's happening?
Are you saying like right now, today, or at that point?
No, I mean like at that point.
At that point.
I mean, dude, you're living a National Geographic type television show at this point. You know, it's like, well, shit, we can't land. Well, we're just going to skip off this mountain 5 times. You had some of the most beautiful scenery in the entire world outside. And for me, I like every time. Do you remember when we were coming back from that elk hunt?
Yeah.
And
driving
I was
through
just
that valley.
Yeah, that, and just I was out the window like a dog.
Yes.
Just looking. And remember, and we were driving even through Wyoming, and I was just like, oh my God, look, there's an antelope.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, look over there, Mark. And you're just like, buddy, I've been on this road like 100 times, right? So, but for you, this is virgin ground. You've never done anything like this. I mean, what was going through your head at this point? Like, I would be shaking.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely like, kind of like you were on that Wyoming drive. I was just like, there was so much going on that like at times like you get caught up in like the action, but I made a point like as much as I could throughout the whole trip to just like try to like remind myself like this is such a special thing, take it in. So I tried to find moments to like sit off by myself and just look around in silence, or like just try to process it. But I probably didn't even get to do that as much as I wanted to, because like there was just stuff going on. And the one thing, you know, probably my biggest anxiety going into this trip, it wasn't like, am I going to get in a plane crash? Like, these things can be dangerous. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't like worrying about grizzly bears. It wasn't, am I going to kill a caribou? Like, my biggest anxiety was it was more so like the people stuff. Like, you know, am I going to be a good fit with this group? Are they going to like me? You know, I want to make sure I can, you know, pull my own weight and, you know, do all the stuff that I need to do. I don't want them to feel like I don't know what I'm doing or anything like that. So it was like that people stuff. So because of that, like I was constantly, and I would do this anyways, but I was especially trying to make sure I did a really great job of like always be helping, always doing something. Like I didn't want to be that guy that was like lazy and like sitting off by himself playing around. So it was like whenever other people were doing stuff, I was constantly trying to find a way that I could help out. So because of that, I maybe didn't get as much time to just like sit and like take stuff in, because I was like, can I help you move this bag? Can I help you cook this thing? Can I help do this thing? So I was like running around like a chicken with his head cut off, just trying to make sure I was, you know, doing my part. But still, I mean, there was still plenty of time to soak it all in. So yeah, it was just unreal. And we, you know, once we got everything set up, we were going to go out and do some scouting, because that first day when you fly in, you can't hunt on the day you fly in.
Yep.
So we finally got our stuff around, and, you know, now I'm learning a little about the TV side of things too. So they got me all mic'd up, and they kind of talked through some of the things they like to do and how they like to do this stuff. And we start hiking up the mountain, and we were basically going to hike up to a high point and sit up there in glass and just try to get an idea of where these caribou are coming through and where we might want to go back to the next morning. And I found, like, at first, when you've got, like, you know, there's me and Steve and Doug up front, and then there's these other 2 guys behind you walking along, and then there's 2 cameramen. They're, like, running ahead of you or walking circles around you or, like, standing right next to you with the camera in your face. And a couple times I almost, like, started to laugh. It just felt so absurd. So I had to, like, catch myself. Like, I got, like, a half smirk on my face. It's like, keep it together, Kenyon.
Yeah, act like you've been there before.
Yeah. But yeah, the scouting was good. We saw a lot of caribou, and you know, just got to have some good conversations with the guys. And then on our way back to camp that evening, Giannis spotted a grizzly bear just underneath our camp, just off the ridge. So we all go walking down the ridge a little bit closer, and we're watching him with our binos and stuff. Just one of the most beautiful grizzly bears I've ever seen. He was like pure gold, like sheeny blonde gold, like beautiful coat. And he was just feeding on blueberries and stuff. There's berries all over the place. And he's feeding on these blueberries, and then he starts angling his way up the ridge, getting closer and closer and closer, and we're all geeking out on it, loving watching him. But he gets to maybe like 100 yards, 90 yards, and Steve's like, you know, we probably ought to get this guy out of here, especially because of how close we were to camp. So he starts yelling, making some noise, and the bear looks up finally and notices up there. But instead of like spooking off, he's just curious. So he just starts running towards us.
Cool.
Yeah. So then Steve's like picking up rocks and throwing rocks towards it and yelling. And finally he got to maybe, I don't know, 65 or 70 yards or somewhere around that ballpark. And then finally he does like, all right, realize I don't want to mess with these guys. And he turns and runs off. But it was just a really cool, encounter. And like now I'm like, all right, I've got like my Alaska, like this is everything I want. I've seen tons of caribou. I had my grizzly bear encounter. I'm camped out on top of this windswept rocky ridge, and I can see like hundreds of miles maybe in every direction. That's all I need. I'm good.
Right. So then, while you were on this little scouting mission, did you guys locate some caribou, and were you putting a plan together on how to attack it that next day?
Yeah, so here's the thing with these caribou is like they're constantly moving, and it was just like there's always caribou. So we kind of identified like a general path, like a travel path. Like basically where we were situated, there was almost like a pass in a chain of mountains and some ridges that kind of like deer are funneled through topography by saddles in a mountain or something like that, or saddles on a ridge. There was a series of saddles and ridges that were funneling this migration of caribou past our ridge. So we located this general area where there's just constantly caribou trickling through, and we knew that these caribou are there one day, they're gone the next. So there's going to be different caribou, but assuming that the migration continued, assuming that we weren't at the end of the migration, we knew that they should be back there the next day. So we found this general area, and then the plan was the next day to just go back up to this little glassing knob and watch again. But that was as firm of game plan as we had, but it's kind of all you needed. This is the most absurd hunting I've ever had in my life. Like, it was unlike anything else, unlike elk hunting, unlike deer hunting, like by it 10 times, in that there's constantly animals. You're constantly watching animals, and it wasn't a question. To be honest, very quickly we realized as soon as we realized, like, okay, yes, we're in the middle of the migration. It's not like the end of it. Like, we're in it. It wasn't a question of if we were going to shoot caribou. It was just which one you wanted to shoot, because there were so many. But I will say, what we found is that when I went into this, when Giannis was like telling me, we're going to be hopefully intercepting the migration, and when I started thinking about a caribou migration, I was thinking of like Discovery Channel stuff where you see like these massive amoebas of like 20,000 or 30,000 animals all together, like pouring across an area. It wasn't like that. It was like, here's a group of 5, here's a group of 20, here's a group of 50, here's a group of 15, and they're all kind of strung out. Or you could like sit on a mountainside and you could look on one ridge and you see a group of 20 there, a group of 50 there, a group of 10 there. But like any different direction you looked, you'd see a group of caribou there, and they're constantly moving through, or they bed for a little bit, or they mill around feeding for a little bit. But it wasn't like this giant wave of them. It was just this never-ending kind of trickle and flow of different size groups coming through. So that was what we started to see on day one, and we continued to see that the rest of the way.
Okay, so is this one of those things where you guys just kind of you found out where they were, and then you drop off the mountain to go intercept the basic line of the path of the migration then?
Yeah, and there were, it wasn't like one single line. Like, there was lots of different little directions and stuff that different groups of them would go. But yeah, I mean, when it came down to it, days, the 3 days that we were actually hunting, that basically ended up being what we did. We had this general glassing section that we would go to, and we would explore different areas. But many times we ended up back there, and you could just watch over this large area, and you just sit in the hillside with spotting scopes and binoculars, and you just pick out different groups. You eyeball that group, you find a different group, eyeball that group, find a different group, eyeball that group. And because there were so many animals, Steve was like, we should be pretty picky about what we're going to shoot. I mean, there's no reason to go off and shoot the first thing you see. So he kind of described the main things that you're looking for in a good, mature bull. And with a big mature caribou bull is going to have, so they kind of differentiate on a caribou. There's like these tines, and like there's the tops, and there's the fronts. So the fronts are like those things that obviously come out from the front, like these different little arms and hands of antler that comes out right above, kind of like a brow tine type thing. And And then there's the tops, which are like, the tall main beam that goes up, and then you've got those top tines up there. So a good bull would have like long tops, like maybe palmated tops. He'd have back scratcher points, which are these little kind of flyers that come off the back of that big main beam. And he'd have, big sweeping fronts with good tines and maybe a shovel or two, which are these like kind of palmated, I don't even know how to describe it. But
yeah.
in the picture of my bull, you can see one. I've got a single shovel on mine. You can see this flat kind of palmated vertical set of antlers that comes like straight off his forehead. So we were looking for that, and then also you're looking at, in relative to all the other caribou. So you need to like establish a context because they all look big.
Yeah.
So you kind of need to look at a bunch of them and then compare this one to that one, this one to that one. So very quickly I realized like we were going to be pretty picky. And so day one, we get up, we make some, granola or oatmeal in the morning and coffee, get around, and then we head back up the mountain. And we're sitting there and we're seeing all these caribou again, and we're glassing and figuring stuff out. And finally we spot a caribou that looked good, and Steve was like, yeah, that's a good one. So he grabbed Doug, and he's like, Doug, let's go after this one. So they go taking off after that one, and they took the two cameramen, and then myself, Brody, and Giannis stayed up on the mountainside so that we didn't have 7 people trying to chase these caribou, and we watched and glassed from above. And they made a move on this group of caribou, but these bulls were moving so fast across the terrain that Steve and the crew, they kind of angled where we saw them.
Yeah.
But within moments of like them starting to hike after them, these caribou were past that point and moving way far to the left. So we watched from above and watched them miss the caribou by a mile, and they're gone. And then they continued stalking in, thinking they were getting on them, and then they finally realized that they weren't. But another group of caribou had moved in, and another nice new bull came through, and Doug ended up not shooting that one, but we thought maybe he would. But basically that whole morning was watching that happen, and they didn't end up shooting anything, but super cool just watching it all happen. And meanwhile, I was just sitting up on the mountain watching other animals and just kind of soaking it in and taking pictures and stuff. And eventually they come back up, and we talk about what happened, et cetera, and we're BSing and stuff. And while we're kind of getting shit around again, I'm glassing, and I spot a new group of bulls that popped out over another hill across the ridge. And I'm like, oh man, there's some really good ones up there. And after everybody looked, like, yep, there's a really good one. And so he's like, your turn, Mark. And at this point, it was like a roller coaster. Is the only way I could describe it. And I was kind of hoping that I wouldn't shoot one early. Like I was hoping I could shoot a caribou on the last day, so you work really hard and like have that whole experience, and then it finally happens. And also, my only anxieties again were like related to like the people related stuff. I just didn't know what the process was going to be like, right. with the show.
How did they determine who got first shot, or was it just kind of a shoot from the hip thing?
So I think Steve was just going to bounce back and forth between me and Doug on stalks, and then once we got a chance, then he would shoot one. So Doug got his first stalk, that didn't go. So then my name got called for the second stalk. But I don't know if I was like mentally ready, because I told Doug, I'm like, hey Doug, I want you should have the first shot. You were invited on this trip first. I was a late addition. You've been thinking about this for a year. I want to make sure you get one. So I thought, I want him to shoot one, and then also I kind of wanted to let someone else go through the whole thing, and I could observe, because it's not like hunting on your own,
Yeah.
When you're hunting on your own, you make all the decisions, you do it your way, you gut the deer your way, you process the deer your way, and there's no one no one else to worry about. In this situation, it was like, it was like I was living in someone else's house. Do you know how that is? Like if you go visit someone else's house and you're there staying at their place, like you're following their rules. You got to put stuff in the place they want to put stuff. Like
you're not going to sit on their couch in the underwear.
Right. And like I have like anxiety. I have a small amount of anxiety when I stay at other people's house, because like I don't want to do something the wrong way, or I don't want to mess up their stuff, or whatever it might be. So I had like those kinds of feelings, because I just didn't, you just don't know what the norms are. So for example, like if I were to shoot one, should I just dig in and start gutting it right away like I would, or does Steve do the gutting because that's how he likes it on the show, or like so all these like little questions were the things that were like giving me anxiety. So all that to say that now all of a sudden it's my turn to go, and I was like not mentally prepared. Like I was thinking Doug was going to be shooting today and I would observe, But no, it's like go time. So like this whole time I'd been clicking, going up the hill of the roller coaster, click, 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 going higher and higher and higher. And then like I'm at the top, and then Steve says, all right, Mark, let's go. Now I'm just off the edge flying down. And from that point on, it was just a blur. So we go running down the mountain. Got 2 cameramen behind me running, and we're like sprinting down because these bulls were coming across the ridge, and then they went behind this big hill, but they're going to come over this hill and drop into this flat kind of basin, and we have to intercept them at that basin, because if we don't get to the basin before, it's not really a basin, it's more of a bench. If we don't get to that bench on the ridge before they do, they're going to see us. So we have to get there before they come over top of this hill. So we're racing our way down there, and I'm huffing and puffing and cruising down there. We finally get to this little knob looking over the bench, and we drop down and start glassing, and we don't see the caribou. So now it's like, oh crap, did they like go around the corner, go another way? But a minute of glassing maybe, and all of a sudden, this is when I did get that Discovery Channel moment where like you just saw like trees pop out from the top of the hill, and slowly these trees became heads and then necks and then bodies as all these bulls came over the hill, and then they just started piling, and they were in one big massive group of maybe like 50 or 60 or something, I don't know, something like that. This big group coming down the mountain, and right in the front is this big snowy white maned big bull. And so I lay down, I put my pack in front of me, put my rifle on the pack. And there's several nice bulls. So I'm not exactly sure which of these bulls is like the best one, but Steve's like, it's that front one, and I'm like, look at him, like he looks really good, but the one behind it looks really good. So they're coming across, they come down the hill, they're coming across the bench, and I look over at Steve, I'm like, hey Steve, do you think we should try to crawl, kind of cut a little farther to the left so we can intercept them at a closer distance? And he's like, well, how far are you comfortable shooting? And I'm like, well, I'd like a shot at like 200 yards. Would make me super happy. 200 or less, because I don't gun hunt. I gun hunt like a couple days a year.
Right.
And when I do gun hunt, I'm up in northern Michigan, where the longest shot you're going to get is like 60 or 70 yards.
Right.
So
right.
I'm not a long range shooter. I'm not a long range rifle shooter. I've been practicing at 100 and 200 yards with this rifle that Giannis was letting me borrow when I was out in Montana. And I kind of went into it saying, yeah, I know lots of guys take way longer shots than that. I know like 300 or 400 yard shots are like the norm for a lot of guys. But for me to be comfortable, I'd rather do 200. Like I don't need to stretch it. But Steve's like, well, what do you want to shoot at? I'm like, well, I'd be happy if it's 200 or less. And he's like, well, look at your scope and look at the 2 hash marks down. That's 300. Use that. I'm like, and I'm not gonna.
Oh, that easy.
Yeah,
it's just that easy.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm not gonna say no. I'm not gonna like argue with him about it. But in my head, I'm like, shit. Fortunately, though, and I just want to say up front, like, before I go any further, I want to preface that, like, everyone, and Steve too, everyone was just like awesome about. Steve wasn't pressuring me into doing anything I didn't want to do, and I felt super comfortable, and everything was great. But regardless of like how great they were about it, I still felt like pressure. You know what I mean? Like they weren't putting any pressure on me, but I was putting pressure on myself.
Right.
Is what I'm trying to say. So, so Steve's like, just put that second hash on there. Luckily, they kept angling closer, and I'm kind of waiting, and they're moving pretty quick. And then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna shoot when they stop. Steve's like, well, they're not going to stop. I'm like, oh crap, you're right, because they're moving on a pretty good clip. And then he's like, make sure you don't shoot two, because there's they're all bunched together and they're kind of coming in and out. And I'm like, oh geez. So I'm taking a longer shot than I've taken often, and they're moving,
they're on the move.
And they're like pacing in between. They're all bunched up, and I'm like, geez, this is a debacle. Right. But like in the moment, I didn't really have time to like think through this. It was just like, this is a situation, this is happening. So long story short, got my gun rested on my pack. This is all happening. I'm gonna be taking this shot, so I get the scope on it, and I ranged. I got 235, I think was the last range I took. So I put it right on him, and then just shot. Like it happened fast. Like I was on him, He was moving. As soon as he came out from behind another one, and I had an open shot, I shot. And instantly you could see impact. Like you could see I hit him. He stands there, and then like and then he like almost immediately lays down. So I'm like, oh, awesome. Like, he's going down. It's done. But then, like, it's not like I'm not celebrating. I'm not excited. I'm just like, whew. And then I'm watching, but he hasn't, like, keeled over yet. He just lays there. And then he stands back up. And I'm like, oh, God, no. What happened? So then I put another shot on him. And this time, he goes down, lays down again, and then does some kicks, and he dies. But it was, like, a longer process than I would have liked. I would have liked if it was, like, one shot, drops, and he's instantly dead. You know, that shoulder shot that just knocks him right down. So, like, I'm feeling, like, a little bit like, oh, crap, I didn't have a great shot, blah, blah, blah. But long story short, after a little while, we walked down there, check him out. My first shot was back a little bit. My second shot was in the heart, knocked him, took care of him right there. But, I think that first one, it was just the chaos of the moment, the nerves, the moving shot, all these things that maybe weren't ideal. Led to a not ideal first shot. Luckily, the second one I was able to recompose and make it happen. But I felt the reason I mention all this is that in that moment I felt like horrible. Like I wasn't excited. All I felt was like horrible about that shot. Like I was embarrassed. I felt like all these guys watching, this stuff's being filmed, and like Steve, this guy I really respect. I would like to show that I'm like adequate. Like, what does he think about my bad first shot? Like, all these things, like, running through my head. And so, like, I kind of am bummed with myself for not being able to enjoy the moment. And, like, instead, like, in my head, I was, like, just all these anxieties. But looking back on it now, like, I can remember, like, what an incredible moment. I just remember walking up to this animal and just being, like, in shock and awe of, like, just the size and the beauty. And just, like, wow, this happened. Just the whole thing was a crazy roller coaster of like emotions, and I just killed a caribou on my first day of actually hunting caribou, and just big, beautiful. I mean, the coat is so silky and like full, and this mane. I just kept putting my fingers in that white mane on his neck. Just amazing and interesting. Caribou are the only ungulate hoofed animal in North America that has a fully fur-coated nose. It doesn't have that rubbery nose like a deer or an elk or something like that.
Really?
It's
cool.
totally covered in hair, because of what a cool environment they live in. So I remember touching the nose and being like, wow, this is just like so cool. Kind of like a mixture of like peach fuzz and like my goatee maybe covering the nose. So, and then these antlers, I mean, just like unreal how big these things are. Another fun fact about caribou is they have the largest antlers in proportion to body size of any North American ungulate.
Oh, cool.
So yeah. So it was wild, man.
When the deer's dead, or the caribou's dead, you are now able to celebrate this kill, and you walk up to it, and you're looking at it. What was going through your mind, at the time where you bent over and you laid your hands on this animal for the very first time?
It was the two things. It was still the internal turmoil over how the actual thing went down, mixed with just like wow. I just kept saying wow. Just like the whole experience, everything about this trip was like overwhelming, like the landscape, the wildlife, just all the other things surrounding it was just overwhelming sense of just like bigness and like awe. So that's kind of what I was feeling. It was just like shock and awe and appreciation too. I mean, sitting there like I always try to do this, just kind of thank the animal or whomever or whatever it might be, whatever powers above that brought this moment to be, and so I did that and just was like, this is just such an incredible blessing to be here and to have this animal. So just a lot of all those things, just kind of a huge mixed pot of all sorts of stuff going on.
Now, how big, because you've killed an elk before, so how big was this caribou compared to an elk that you shot? And then did any of those guys know roughly how old this bull was that you shot?
So relative to a bull elk a bull caribou is smaller. So a big bull caribou might be like 400 pounds or 450, or I don't know, maybe a really big one would be bigger than that. Bull elk could be 700 pounds, 800 pounds, something like that. So definitely smaller than my bull elk from a body perspective, but still really big. And also
right.
Because of the low quality diet of the food available for caribou, they eat just lichen and stuff like that, these little tiny lichens up on the mountainside. Because of that diet, they have this massive, massive stomach, like this huge bloated stomach. So like his belly just looked like a beach ball or bigger, like just massive. So really interesting in that regard. But the antlers were much bigger. So the antlers were bigger than my elk. So the antlers are huge, but the body was maybe a little bit smaller. Now, as far as how old this caribou was, we didn't really know, but it was definitely mature. Like definitely a big mature bull. If that means 4 years old or 6 years old or how old, I'm not sure. And nobody there seemed to be sure either. But definitely one of the most mature bulls we'd seen. Like up until like the last day, this was probably the top 1 or 2 largest caribou we saw the whole time until the last day.
Awesome.
So yeah, man. And then, like I mentioned earlier, then I had, those worries about, okay, now what's the process? Like, should I get going on gutting him right away, or do I need to wait for the camera crew, or does Steve start and then I help? So all that kind of stuff, had me uncomfortable, but made it through. And Steve kind of led the way and stuff, and I helped out, and, we broke it down, and all that was fine, and got him all gutted and quartered and packed away, and that was cool. Again, similar to when I killed my elk, I was just so overwhelmed by the size of everything in there. Like, just gutting this animal is so different than gutting a deer. Like, you could stick out your arm all the way to your shoulder and not get to the esophagus. So that was interesting, and just this massive balloon of a stomach. But got all that taken care of, packed everything up, and then we brought all the meat maybe 50, 60 yards away from the gut pile and set it down, because we still had a couple hours of daylight left, and we figured we'd sit up on the mountain and glass and maybe find another one for Doug. So we did that. We got on the mountainside, and we're looking around for caribou and stuff. And again, I spot something off in the distance, and it's not a caribou, though. It's a big old grizz. So I spot another grizz and a cub. So this is a big sow. She was huge and brown and patchy, very patchy, different colored tufts of skin or hair all over. But her cub was very much like the other grizzly we saw, really sheeny, golden. And man, he was just having a great time. He was doing somersaults down the side of the mountain, rolling over and over. And at one point, he ran over to a caribou shed and started wrestling with the shed. It was awesome. And so we started making bets. She was running. They were running down the mountain. They were a long ways off, a mile away from where we were, maybe further. But they were running towards us. And Steve was like, what do you think? Do you think she could possibly smell that gut pile? And so we started placing bets on whether or not she knew about that gut pile. Why would she be running right down towards us this whole way, a long ways? So we started wondering if she was going to come all the way to that gut pile. So we watched her for an hour, coming down the hill. But then finally she made it to a berry patch, and then they hung up at the berry patch. They never did make it to the gut pile, but they ate some berries. We watched them for a long time, and finally she drops behind the hill and starts angling again closer towards the gut pile and stuff. And then we're like, all right, we should probably get our meat and get out of here before they do discover it. So we hiked back to the meat, loaded up, and then did the long hike back with a heavy pack. And that was a good load. I had a back quarter, front quarter, and the skull and antlers on my back. And I'm glad it wasn't a 6 mile hike, because that was a pretty heavy load.
So what did you do with the meat? Because you guys were dropped in, right? There wasn't a plane still there, was there? Yeah,
no planes, no anything. We were just out there all by ourselves. But it was cold. It was cool out there.
Okay.
So we just, we had everything in game bags, cheesecloth type game bags, and we hiked back towards camp. And on a hillside above camp, we just kind of made a meat cache and just stacked everything up there against the antlers so that they could get air to all sides of the meat. And during the day it was probably in the 40s or 50s, probably 40s, high 40s most days, and super windy. It was very windy. And then at night, it could be down to the 20s or low 30s or something. So it was plenty cool enough for that meat to be fine there. And then that night we cut off a hunk of that caribou meat and sliced it real thin and fried it up, and we all ate a little bit of it. And
how did that taste?
Really good. really good. Just like hot, buttery.
Compared to your elk?
So I don't really know how to compare it yet.
Gotcha.
Relatively similar. I don't know how different. Yes, different, but I can't quite put my finger on how to articulate the difference. But pretty similar to elk and deer. Maybe it just felt especially good because I was eating it on the side of a mountain.
Right.
So yeah, man, great first day of hunting. And, my anxieties aside, like the stress around that, unnecessary. Like I didn't need to be stressed out about stuff because, nobody was giving me a hard time about anything, but I was putting that on myself. But all that aside, it was just like unbelievable, super, super cool experience. Seeing the bears, seeing all those animals, actually getting to kill a caribou, packing them off the mountain. Just amazing. So that night, it was just kind of like in awe of all that. And then the next morning, I wake up. It's day 3 that we're out there. I open up my tent door, and the very first thing I see is a grizzly bear and cub in our camp.
Did you poop your pants a little bit?
No, but I was like, whoa, good morning.
Yeah.
And like right away, I'm like, grizzly in camp. I yell it out. Everyone's still in their tents, like still like sleeping. We're like getting around. Like grizzly in camp, and then when I see this grizzly is right next to like the tent where the crew was sleeping, so like the camera guys. So then I start hollering at it, try to get it away, and then luckily he or she and the cub look at me, and then they bump off the hill, and they drop over the side. But over there where these grizzlies ran to, one of the crew members had a separate tent. He didn't sleep with the rest of them because he has night terrors, actually. So he sleeps in a separate tent just so he doesn't wake people up. So I see these bears go run over the hill, and then all of a sudden I hear him yelling. I'm like, oh no! Like they ran right into him. Yeah. And fortunately, they ran like 30 yards of him. But then when he started yelling, they turned and ran the other way. So no issues. But it could have been hairy because a sow in a cub type situation like that is never good to surprise. And she was right in there close to their tent. So that was an interesting start to the day. And I forgot to mention another crazy thing that happened was our very first night there. In the middle of the night, like amazingly heavy winds came through. Like I thought my tent was gonna get crushed to the ground, or like the rain fly was gonna get ripped off. Like I woke up several times in the night, like so loud. My tent is like pushed down over top of my head. Like I thought for sure stuff was gonna get ripped out. Fortunately, because of how windy it had been during the day, we staked everything, but then we also put big rocks over all the stakes too. So that saved the day for our tents. But the crew, they slept in these big teepees, like teepee style tents. There's 2 of them, and one of them, like half of the stakes all came ripping out. So a couple of those guys had to wake up in the middle of the night and were like out in these gale force winds trying to restake these tents. And then there's another guy that was sleeping solo in one of them. And that one in the middle of the night, like all the stakes came out and the middle pole like came out. So he had to, for like 2 hours, sit holding with all his might onto the center pole to keep the teepee from flying away. And like he was yelling, but nobody else could hear him. So he had a rough night.
Man, that is crazy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, like I've never been in heavier winds in a tent by far. I mean, it was out of this world. So that was the tent, and then day number 3 of the trip started with the grizzly encounter in the morning, and then just more of the same the rest of the day. We just watched hundreds and hundreds of caribou, just like incredible seeing all these animals interact and flowing off the mountains and passing through, and you just glass all these different bulls up and look at them and watch them. Lots of times you see these bulls fighting and stuff. Really cool. And then that day, Doug got a shot at one. He killed that bull, and we packed that one off the mountain. That night it started to rain. We recorded a podcast episode for Steve's podcast. And then the third day, same deal. Hiking all over the place, glassing all over the place. Found a big bull that Steve wanted to shoot. It was really far away. So this time, a couple guys stayed back, and then me and Steve and the camera guys decided to go after him. And then we kind of went on a kind of wild goose chase. Like Steve wanted to go after this one, so we go drop way off this mountain down to this deep drainage. And then we get to the bottom of the drainage, and we spot some new bulls up at the top of the ridge again that looked really good. So we go all the way back to the top, like sprinting up the side of this mountain. We get situated there, and these bulls drop down in front of us, and then Steve didn't like them so much, so he's like, let's go back after the original one. So then we go all the way back down to the bottom of the drainage, And then at this point, we spot another group of bulls, and this one's halfway up that mountain, and Steve ended up taking one of those, but super nice bull. And then it was just a heck of a pack out of that drainage, because now we're at the bottom of this steep ravine, and we had to go straight up this really steep face that, like, that load nearly killed me. Because I took a back quarter, and then I also found a big moose shed, like a big moose shed. So I strapped that on my pack. So I had a heavy load, and this was a very steep hill. So that one I was like finally feeling it. Like, this is our third caribou we've packed out in 3 days, and that one I finally was like, okay, I'm getting tired. But fortunately, Steve must have been feeling it a little bit too, because he was taking breaks, and so I was able to take breaks with him, and that was good. So
awesome.
And then that night we had like our meal scene, and you know, because usually on the Meat Eater show they do like a meal scene where they cook up something they killed, and so we did an Asian hot pot, so like this big boiling pot of like Asian broth mixture with like onions and carrots and I don't know, all these different things in there. And then we sliced up caribou heart and caribou backstrap and ptarmigan heart and ptarmigan breast. So ptarmigan's kind of like an Arctic like grouse type bird.
Did you guys shoot that while you were out there?
Yeah, I shot one, and Steve shot one, and Brody shot one, I think.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, we sliced all that up, and then you skewer a little slice of this meat on a little wooden stick, and then you dip it in that broth for like 15 seconds, let it just sear really quick, and then you take it out, dip it in a sauce, and eat it with your fingers, and holy crap, that was amazing.
So all that had to be packed in, right, with that plane. So
yeah.
all the vegetables and all the utensils. So the production of the Meat Eater television show, let's say if it was just you and me going out there to drop, we'd probably have, 75% less gear to take just because of the production, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, they had so much camera equipment and other stuff. Just a lot of stuff. So quite a production, but it made for comfortable, living situation out there, because we had like a little tarp over our little meal area, so we could be, sheltered from the rain. On that day, it was raining all day, and the wind a little bit, and it's a nice little nook to sit in there and eat every day, and good food, like different than like when we go backpacking or stuff. Like they had like real sandwiches, and we had mountain houses for dinner. But what I really liked is they brought a massive bag of like candy bars. So there was like dozens of full-size Snicker bars and Kit Kats and stuff. So we ate pretty decent considering. And
so you were comfortable. This wasn't like a real. It was roughing it because you were way out, isolated. But from a food and it wasn't like you were on a spike camp out in the back country like with just the meal for the day, right? Yeah,
we had a little more food than I'm used to. Otherwise, it's similar, but the food situation, we had more food available than usual. Like they brought apples, so that was nice. So we had like lunch meat for sandwiches and apples, and then like granola bars and stuff like that, candy bars, and then every night, you'd have a mountain house meal. And in the mornings, yeah, they brought bagels, like they'd fry bagels in a pot, or there was some oatmeal, stuff like that. So eating, it was fancier than my elk hunting, that's for sure.
Awesome.
And that was it. The next day we were supposed to get picked up early in the morning from the planes, but they ended up not coming till like super late. So we just hung out. We packed up camp and hung out all day on the mountainside, walking around or napping or reading or goofing around. And like I think the planes finally got there like 6 or 7 at night or something. And it started raining. It was raining and cloudy and windy and all that kind of stuff. So it took them a while to be able to get us, but they finally did. Got us out of there late that night, and on the flight back, so on the Super Cub flight back to the town, I saw 30 to 40 moose. Like, it was insane. Like, moose everywhere.
Wow.
So that was sweet. Like, big old paddled moose bulls. I mean, it was sweet.
Right. Awesome.
So, yeah, dude.
So when you were out there, certain times of the year, Alaska or Northern Hemisphere, or even into Canada and whatnot, they have longer days. What was the day like out there? How many hours of darkness was there?
Yeah, so it was like daylight by about 6 in the morning, maybe a touch before 6, and then it was daylight till almost 10 o'clock at night. So
okay.
pretty darn long days.
Okay.
So what, that gives you about 8 hours of darkness. The rest of the day was daylight.
Yeah.
And another thing, I didn't really get to see it, but we did have decent northern lights a couple nights there.
Oh, cool.
I woke up my last night, I set an alarm to try to see them, and I did see them, but just like little slivers of it. Like you'd see just almost like a green string wavering in the sky. But I never got to see it, the whole sky lit up. But I did hear they got some good time-lapse footage of it. So
cool.
Hopefully we'll get to see that. The last night, though, was funny. They had a time-lapse set up right by my tent, and I didn't know it. So I wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., to go see the northern lights. So I wake up, get out of my tent, walk out of my tent, take a piss, look up at the sky, looking for the northern lights, kind of see it, and then go to bed. Well, the next day, I ended up taking a piss right in front of the time-lapse camera.
So your junk is going to be on the next MeatEater show.
Possibly. Hopefully I pointed the other way.
So you made it back to civilization, right? I mean, while you're out there, after the fact, after you've had this experience, you got some time where you're in a plane, you're coming back to civilization, you're just kind of you're thinking about everything that just happened. Has this sparked any ideas from you as far as any additional adventure hunting scenarios that you want to take, whether it's in the States or somewhere else?
Well, I definitely want to go back to Alaska again. Like as often as I can, I'd like to get up there. Because it's just, I mean, we were talking about this on Steve's podcast about the fact that in the lower 48, like we are fighting now today to fix mistakes that were made, 150 years ago still, or 50 years ago, or whatever it might be, like whatever it might be, to wildlife populations and or habitat. Like we're fighting to try to protect the last vestiges of wilderness and open space that we have, and to continue to rebound populations or protect them at the place that we've been able to get these animals back to now. But in the lower 48, it's like repair mode, kind of. We've really screwed things up here, and we're just trying to make it a little bit better and fix the small things we've been able to recover so far. In Alaska, it's still, for the most part, like it was 200 years ago. The large portion of it is relatively intact, relatively still wild, relatively, in harmony with how it should be. And now it's just like, don't screw this up. So we screwed up in the lower 48, and we're trying to fix it and keep what we've got left. In Alaska, like, we've got this incredible thing still, this public land and this wilderness and these places that are just amazing. We've got this sliver of what it used to be still there, and it just has reminded me of how important it is to keep that the way it is. Just knowing that there's somewhere that is still like that today, it's very reassuring for me. Like it's good to know there's still a wild place. It's good to know that you can go somewhere and be hundreds of miles from anybody else and be surrounded by grizzlies and wolves and caribou and the night and the northern lights. It is like good for my soul to know that is there and available, and I just want to fight really hard to make sure it stays that way. Amen,
man. Amen. So any other takeaways from this trip? I mean, not necessarily just the adventure and emotional standpoint, but anything else that was just really cool, or something that you want to tell the listeners that they should try to do something like this, or I guess Mark Kenyon's final thoughts.
Yeah, so final thoughts. I think first and foremost, the trip was incredible, from being there and the wildlife and the landscape and killing a caribou and getting all this great meat. All those things were amazing. But just as important, if not maybe even more important, was and I think this comes down to so often, is the people too. Like, just the group of guys I was with on this trip were so great. They were so welcoming to me. They were so much fun to be around. And so I just want, I appreciate that so much. I appreciate the fact that Steve and the guys invited me to go on this trip. Just an unbelievable opportunity, and I can never thank all of them enough. Just the coolest guys in the world. So I would say, number one, if you are not watching the MeatEater TV show or listening to the MeatEater podcast, you really should be. They're doing awesome work. The guys behind the scenes are amazing guys, super fun guys. So check out, Make sure you're following Dirt Myth on Instagram. The guy takes some incredible photos. Chris Gill, follow Chris Gill on Instagram. He's another terrific camera guy. Brody Henderson and Giannis Patelis just did an awesome job of like keeping the train on the tracks as far as the whole production and everything. And then Steve, I mean, I think most everyone listening knows who Steve Rinella is, but it was really cool to spend more time with him, and he's someone that I've looked up to for a long time. I've modeled a lot of the ways that I try to communicate things kind of around the way he has, because I think he's just done a tremendous job of representing the hunting community in a positive light, and I think he's influenced the hunting community in a really positive way, moved us in a direction that I think is very important. So, I'm just going to continue to be appreciative of what he's doing, and it was neat to be able to learn from him in person. And these dudes are way goofier in person than you might expect. Just constantly laughing about stupid things and making up songs. Steve's got nicknames for everybody. He starts making up songs about different people. Or we were doing hand standoffs, seeing who could do a handstand for the longest time, or who could do planks for the longest time, or all sorts of goofy stuff like that. So just a really good time from a personal standpoint too.
Awesome.
But then as to other final thoughts, I think just to what I said there a second ago, this just reminded me again of how fortunate and blessed we are that, our forefathers and people that came before us had the foresight to protect some of these places and leave them as they were, or that did things to allow our wildlife populations to recover in the lower 48 or to keep them great as they are in Alaska. So I would encourage everyone to educate yourself on this, read about the history of these places, read about these wild places, learn about what we have here, realize that you as an American have access to just this. You have access to a unbelievable swath of landscape and wildlife and experience. It's there for you. You don't need to pay anything to go in there and do these things. It takes planning. It takes a lot of work. It takes some money to get to places. But it's there for you. So Go see these places, experience these places, and then, when needed, stand up for these places. Call your congressman, write letters, tell your friends and family these places are important. So I think that's what I would say. Yeah,
very, 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 very important.
So yeah, man, unbelievable trip.
So what's next, man?
Real quick, though, before we move on, we need to take a second to thank our partners at Whitetail Properties for their support of the Wired Hunt podcast. And our producer, Spencer Newharth, caught up with one of the Whitetail Properties land specialists recently to get a little insight into the process of booking your first outfitted hunt.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Tim Woods, a land specialist out of Central Ohio. And Tim is going to be telling us about what to look for when booking your very first outfitted hunt.
Well, I guess I would say if you're looking to book with your first outfitted hunt, first thing I'll do is, maybe not go right to social media. I know social media is big at this day and age, but you want to find an outfitter that is not out there pounding his chest a lot, saying, look at me, look at what we can do. From my experience, being that, I am an outfitter, and I see a lot of guys doing a lot of stuff on social media, which is great. They're promoting the sport and they're promoting their business. But it seems like they need the hunters. If you want to look for an outfitter that doesn't do a whole lot of advertising, because they don't need to, because they've got a returning client base that they cater to, and they're just from word of mouth is the best, business model you can have as far as taking care of the people and treating them right. And they're always going to come back. And if they can't come back, they're going to have their buddies come in their place and so forth. So if you're looking to book your first outfitted hunt, get some references from that outfitter and call them and see how they treated them, whether they killed or didn't kill.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Tim currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/woods. That's WOODS.
Well, I got back late Sunday morning, 1 in the morning on Sunday, and then slept for a few hours, got up, drove across the state to eastern Montana, found a campsite in this area where I want to hunt, and now I'm trying to kill a Montana whitetail. So,
Awesome. Trying
to get that done. It's been a little bit. It's going to be more challenging than I originally thought. Well, super hot. It's like 95, 97 degrees. So I'm like just sweating to death every day. Excuse me, got the hiccups. And then, I'd found a bunch of public land pieces when I just studied the maps. And I was looking for public that, again, like what I was doing last year, I was looking for public land that got down into this river bottom cover that was adjacent to alfalfa fields. Because I wanted food and I wanted cover that I could hopefully get in between. So I found like 5 or 6 of these places on the maps. And then my plan was to get here Sunday night and drive around and glass them all that night and get an idea of which areas held, possible mature bucks, and then go hunt those spots. Well, what I didn't do in my, like, all these different things going on, what I didn't plan for was, like, drive time. So I didn't realize how spread out this stuff was. It didn't look that big on the map, but it actually takes like an hour or more to get between some of these places. So that's made it tough for me to like get down and explore some of these like farther southern sections. So the first night I explored kind of the northern side, and then the next morning I woke up really early and drove way down to the southern section and checked those out. And nothing really looked all that great, unfortunately. A lot of the stuff is all grazed, so like it's just like grazed to dirt almost from cows and sheep and stuff. So like 4 out of the 6 properties that I thought would have potential don't, like, not even worth hunting at all. Another one, I did see some deer in a neighboring alfalfa field, but it was pretty far away from the cover. Like, these deer were pretty far away from the public, and looks like they're heading into bed on the private too. I didn't know if they're going to make it down to the public or not. I glassed in the spotting scope for a long time and never saw them quite make it there. So that's, I don't know. The best spot that I found so far is the spot that fortunately is closest to my campsite. And there's a state land, and then there's a few sections of BLM land that surround this one alfalfa field where I saw a ton of deer the first night, like 50, 60 deer, something like that, including 2 potential like shooter bucks. One for sure shooter, another one that maybe. And so that's where I've been hunting. Unfortunately, the public land, like, I'm not able to get in between the deer. It seems like there's bedding and food on the private, so these deer are bedding and then going right into the private. They're staying on the private to bed. They don't have to come onto the public to bed like they did in that property I hunted last year. So last night I set up a stand on one side of this that's as close as I could get to where that food was, and I was hoping that maybe these deer come out the other side of the cover towards this other distant alfalfa field. And I saw a bunch of deer, maybe like 15 deer, but all does and fawns, and then 2 little 1.5-year-old bucks. And went back in there this morning, same place, left everything in the tree, same deal, does and a couple little bucks. Nothing older than 1.5 years, little like forky. So that's been a little bit disheartening. Was hoping to at least get eyes on a mature buck so I could be adjusting my stand location based on a sighting, but I don't have that. So I pulled my stand this morning, and as soon as we get done with this, I'm going to go back in there and move a set. I'm going to try to get to that BLM land that's in there. It's landlocked BLM land, so you can't actually access it anyway, except for if you follow the state land all the way to the river, you can get in the river. And the river below the high water mark is public access. You can walk the river. So I'm going to walk to the river, and then I'm going to follow that river bottom all the way to this BLM land, and then pop up into the public again and try to get there. And the piece I'm going to go into is directly behind this alfalfa field. So there should be deer in there. The issue is going to be my wind. The wind is just not great. It's going to be blowing to some deer, to some portion of the deer. So I'm hoping that I can stay low in the river to get past a good number of them with my wind hopefully not going to blow because I'm going to be down low. And then I'm going to immediately get up and pop right into a tree. And I'm going to know that stuff due south of me is going to win me. But hopefully it's just that one line, and then the rest of it will hopefully be like I have to make a sacrifice to get in there. I only have a couple days, so I got to kind of
It's that risk reward. It's that risk reward thing that we always talk about.
Exactly. So I got to kind of swing for the fences a little bit here because I just don't have a lot of time. But I think it could be a good spot. I met the rancher who grazes the public land and the private land right next to it. He owns that private land next to it, and he was a really nice guy. We chatted for a long time, and he told me his son-in-law, I think, and a grandson are hunting his private land, and they've been seeing a couple big bucks, including one he claimed was like 24 inches wide, and another one that either had a second main beam or a split brow tine. I'm not sure what he was trying to say, but big. Like, there's a couple big bucks in there that they're seeing, and that sounds like those are different than the deer I saw the first night. So I think if I can get into this spot without spooking a bunch of deer, I'm going to be potentially in a good area.
Cool. Well, man, hopefully the momentum kind of from the hunt in Alaska kind of carries throughout the rest of this little Montana, North Dakota trip you're on.
Yeah, dude. Thank you. I'm hoping so too. I'm feeling like a little bit like, I don't know about how this is going so far, but tonight we'll hopefully be in the right spot. And then, probably Thursday. Hopefully I can get it done by Thursday, and then Thursday I'm going to move to North Dakota and try to refigure it all out again.
And that's the fun part, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. So, and it is supposed to cool down Thursday, or like Wednesday night, Thursday morning. A big cold front's coming through. It's going to rain a bunch, which will be a little bit of a pain, but it's going to drop like 20, 30 degrees. So that should get deer moving.
Awesome. Well, good luck, man.
Thank you, sir. So that's my story. That's what's going on with me. Anything else on your side that you want to share?
That's me fake crying.
What about the trail camera? You checked the trail camera?
Oh yeah, I mean, I got, I talk about this big ag field with a buffer strip in it, right?
Yep. We shed hunted there, right?
Yep, we shed hunted there, and every big mature buck that is in the area was on that trail camera. So, on the one side of the farm, they all show up right in the middle of this ag field, and if it wasn't for my son coming here anytime soon, I would definitely be finding a way. I actually did a podcast with Scott Bestel recently, where we talk about some early season hunting, and me and him get into a conversation about hunting standing ag fields in a scenario like what I'm talking about here, early season. And the goal for me would be to, get in one of these trees and catch these deer. They're basically living in an 80-acre ag field right now.
Right, that standing corn, right?
That standing corn. And with the big acorn drop that is happening right now, I have a feeling they're bedding in the corn and then coming out to a couple acorn groves that surround this ag field, and or not in the corn. They're not bedding in the corn, but they're probably bedding in some of these buffer strips in the corn. So it's roughly the same thing, and making their way to some of these acorn drop sites. And if I was able to do it, which I'm not, I would be somewhere in between these buffer strips and these acorn spots. So. Dan. Yes.
Please find a way to hunt in October. You have to hunt in October.
Well, here's the deal, and you know this, man. Or you're gonna know this.
I know.
It's not an excuse, dude. It is not. It's not an excuse.
I know. You gotta find a way.
I have to do.
You gotta find a way.
I have to do.
I'm gonna send you $100. I'm going to send you $100 check. In the memo line, it's going to say babysitter, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to send you a babysitter check, and you're going to pay for at least one night of babysitting on a good evening.
Buddy,
and you're going to hunt. And then you can show your wife. You can say, "Look, Mark sent me a $100 check. I can't not use it. I have to hunt."
Right. Here's what the memo should say: $100 for this is in a payoff. You should just write the check to my wife and be blunt about it. Be like, this is letting Dan hunt one night.
Go buy yourself something nice, Sarah.
Yeah, go buy yourself something nice. That's what it should be.
Okay, I'll do that. Yeah. I'm dead serious, Dan. I'm gonna buy you a night of hunting in October. I'm gonna send you a check.
First cold front.
Yep, first cold front in October. You go into a good spot, kill one of those suckers.
Yeah.
All right.
I wish it was that easy.
All right. Well, look for it in the mail here when I get back.
Okay. All right. All right. We'll see if you address. I think she'd be down for it if you give her the money directly to her and it doesn't touch my hands at all.
Okay. All right. So do you want me to address it to her? Like write her a special write her a letter? Like dearest Sarah. Dearest Sarah.
Yeah. Dearest Sarah, congrats on the new child. Here's $100 bill as basically a bribe to let your husband go hunting one night in.
Oh, this will be amazing. All right, I'm going to do this, and I just need you to report back to me on exactly how she takes it.
Okay.
And then we're going to really hype up this hunt. Like, I'm going to want full documentation of the hunt. I want, like, Instagram stories every 5 minutes. I'm going to want you to do a full podcast debrief talking about how this all worked out. This will be our, like, October 15th episode. Will be, like, the post Dan Johnson October hunt. And, yeah, this is a good plan. I like it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll the first thing is you have to write the check to my wife, and then after that, we'll see how it all goes down.
All right, dude.
There is a chance. I'm not joking that there's a small chance that she would send the check back to you, or send you a text that that's worth $200. I have 3 kids now, man. Remember?
Oh man. Well, you will soon.
Yep.
Well, dude, I'd say we oughta shut this down. I need to scramble some caribou brains. I gotta clean out the brain cavity area on the skull on my boo here. Get that cleaned out so it doesn't rot. And then I need to take a nap before hunting. So
sounds like a good day.
Yes, that's the day's plan. So good luck with baby stuff. If you guys end up having him early. Fingers crossed, everything's great and healthy. And let's check back in a week.
All right, good luck, man.
And that's it, folks. Thank you for joining in for a little bit of story time today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And before we go, I want to give a big thanks to our partners at Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, the Whitetail Institute of North America, Trophy Ridge, and Huntera Maps. And finally, of course, thank you all for listening. I appreciate your time and your support. If you're hunting this week, I wish you all the luck in the world. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.